Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern Bar Cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 112 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. This time around, we sit down for an awesome chat with Tory Pratt of Pratt Standard Cocktail Co. to discuss her journey through the world of grenadines, tonic syrups, and so much more. Now, it's not a coincidence that we're talking with Tory. It's actually more like a celebration. As of the airing of this episode, you can head over to modernbarcart.com and purchase 4 flavors of Pratt Standard cocktail syrups, including the thing that started it all, their legendary tonic syrup, their complex and tangy grenadine, their ever-popular ginger syrup, and their cola syrup, all made using traditional ingredients and flavor profiles. Through September 30th, 2019, if you enter the coupon code TORY, that's TORY, at checkout, you'll receive 15% off your entire order. And remember, as always, if your order exceeds $40, we ship full free anywhere in the continental US. That coupon code is exclusive to podcast listeners, so you know we really love you. And you know what? Let's keep that love train rolling and give you the chance right now to make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Tequila Sunrise, another cocktail that arose during the cocktail dark ages of the 1970s. Of course, even in recipes like this one that are designed to please the eye perhaps more than the palate, there's always a seed of genius behind the formulation, something timeless that keeps us coming back. To make a Tequila Sunrise, you'll need 2 ounces of Blanco tequila. If you're in a pinch, you can also use a reposado, 2 ounces of orange juice, and 1 ounce of grenadine. We, of course, always use Pratt Standard grenadine. Traditionally, you would build this drink in a rocks glass over a large rock, adding first the tequila, then the orange juice, and finally the grenadine, which is going to sink to the bottom because it's the heaviest. The effect is an orange-red gradient that looks like a beautiful sunrise, and you're going to garnish this cocktail traditionally with a nice big orange wheel right on the side of the glass. Now, if you're looking to turn this into a longer drink, just double that orange juice and stick it in a larger Collins glass. And finally, if you're willing to eschew the pretty colors for a more balanced drink, just shake it quickly over a couple of large rocks before you strain. It still comes out a lovely color, and it tastes at least 10 times better. So now that you've got a use case for your first bottle of Pratt Standard Grenadine, which we taste on the air during this episode, let's get back to our interview with Tory. Some of the things that she and I discuss include how a childhood spent in and around the catering industry gave Tory the inspiration to start her own company and taught her to approach cocktails from a culinary perspective. What it means to get back to the true roots of a traditional cocktail ingredient and why it sometimes takes 47 test batches until you're happy with the end result. The intricacies of sourcing ingredients like exotic kola nuts and Turkish pomegranates, how Tory built her business from a kitchen concept to a brand being sold in 14 states and partnering with Whole Foods. You may not have heard of them, they're kind of small. Strategies for rebranding a line of existing products, equipment you need and mistakes to avoid when making syrups in your own home kitchen, and much, much more. It's always great to sit down with somebody who understands the ins and outs of the mixer's world. It's a strange world, and Tory and I have been operating within it for long enough to have a few good laughs and share our findings with you all. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to present this sweet, tangy conversation with Tory Pratt of Pratt Standard Cocktail Company. Tory, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me today.
Can you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little about you and how you got to be a cocktail entrepreneur?
Sure. So I'm Tory Pratt. I started Pratt Standard Cocktail Company about 4.5 years ago, although it was under a different name then. And I started it because I love cocktails. And I actually was in a totally different profession. I was doing international development work, but I didn't really feel connected to the product of what I was doing. And so my release was cooking. I grew up around the food industry. I always loved food and beverage from the beginning. And my mom was a caterer, so I ate like amazing food growing up. And then I went to college and I actually lost the freshman 15 instead of gaining it because I wasn't eating her amazing food anymore. I used to go to the cafeteria and ask the lunch ladies to give me eggs and take them back to the dorm to cook them myself because it was so gross. But anyways, cooking has been a pastime of mine, and one of the things I came up with was a tonic syrup because I had tried a gin and tonic with a local gin, and I just couldn't taste the gin anymore once I put the tonic on top of it. And so I said to myself, there has to be a way. This was done before, like high fructose corn syrup and everything else. And so I came up with our tonic syrup recipe, 47 different recipe iterations, which was a little crazy. But then we launched it in November of 2014. And honestly, I didn't expect it to go anywhere. I didn't expect this business to grow the way that it has. Or for it to be my full-time gig at any point. But it is. And now we have 5 different syrups, and we're sold in 14 states and on Amazon Prime, which is craziness.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird to think of that because if I had told myself 5 years ago this is what I would be doing, I'm sure you feel that way too. It's a little crazy, but I'm pretty sure the old version of myself would have laughed at me. But
yeah. That's so cool growing up with a mom who's a caterer, especially because I think both of us manufacture in facilities where we interact with a lot of caterers.
Definitely.
Which is an interesting thing. Like I'll just be like manufacturing and somebody will come over with like a plate of stuff and just like plop it down next to me. I'm like, what?
I know.
Where did this materialize from?
And that happened all the time at home. But the thing is, in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, you can actually operate out of your home instead of a commercial facility.
Right.
So we have like a commercial kitchen, but in our home, which is a little crazy, but awesome.
Yeah.
We have this amazing like circular kitchen island that serves as like a dinner table and then also like prep space. But I would grow up and my mom would just like, she'd be making stuff all the time. She and my dad ended up starting a smoked seafood business together when I was little. So there was one time in college where I went to UPS to ship a package, and the guy looked at the package and he was like, "You know 3-way taping? Why do you know 3-way taping?" And I was like, well, I guess I taped a lot of boxes for my parents at the age of like 10.
Yeah. And it's still important, right?
It's still really important. Like the random skills that you learn and you're like, oh wait, actually that's really important.
Little side note, this is like a little therapy session for people who ship things ship glass and liquid through UPS. Yeah. I was at the UPS place dropping off some e-commerce orders, and the guy saw that I'd put like a fragile do not stack sticker on a big box. He goes, that doesn't matter, right? And I'm like, you know what? I've seen how your guys treat the stuff.
Literally
like,
play football with it.
Exactly. So like, even if everything is automated between you and the delivery guy, I still want the delivery guy to see it.
Exactly.
So
no, I totally understand. We had a custom box made for our syrups for shipping 6 at a time, and it survives an 8-foot drop test 3 times. And so that means you can drop it from the height of 8 feet 3 times in a row. I'm sorry if this is boring to most people, but I super geek out about this kind of stuff. Yet, once every like 10 shipments, somebody breaks a box. And so that means they threw it 8 feet at least 3 times.
Right. It really blows my mind when I hear like especially which packages, because I pack them within an inch of their life. I'm like, you get a box and you get a box. Anyway, so let's get back to end therapy session. So catering background growing up, and so obviously you're interested in flavor. Your first spark of an idea was this gin and tonic situation where you thought, and this was at least for us, I imagine, pretty early on in the what you'd want to call maybe the cocktail renaissance. And so an idea is sparked. Can you talk a little bit more about your I guess, interest in cocktails and where that might have come from before and after that fateful gin and tonic experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always loved beverages, but from the perspective of food. So I always think of beverages as something that should have a food lens applied to it. And oftentimes cocktails don't really have that. And so when I started like toying around with cocktails, which was definitely in college, I was that weird person who was like making martinis at the age of like 18. And people are like, what is wrong with you? But I've always really liked like strong flavors and punchy flavors. And I always felt that there's just so much versatility in cocktails that doesn't exist in a lot of other beverages. So you can really express like a full spectrum of flavor in a cocktail in a way that you don't get from wine. Like the difference between two wines, even if they're like crazy opposite ends of the spectrum, is not nearly as different as usually two cocktails are from each other. So I think my interest in cocktails started probably in college, and I just wanted to apply cooking methodologies and like flavor theory to cocktails, and it was the most, I guess, it was the easiest platform to do it on in the beverage world with booze in it, of course.
Yeah, I like that point about versatility and kind of the strength, or like you said, the punchiness of a flavor, because I think of it in the same way. When I think of like a wine, or even to a certain extent some barrel-aged spirits, like brandies and bourbons, and sometimes I think of those as like a narrative story, like the way that the grapes were treated on the vine, the way they were processed, and then the way they were aged, and then the climate and the terroir. I mean, that's a narrative story. But when I think of a cocktail, I think of it more as like a poem or a performance piece. And there's just a different type of energy that goes into that. And I think it totally is more punchy because it is necessarily more of a short form of art. It was created right there in the moment on the spot for you. And so I think the word that you use, punchiness, is really like a good word to describe that, because it shows the force and almost the spontaneity, as opposed to the carefully laid out narrative of a single stream spirit or a single stream like ferment. Absolutely.
And it is, cocktails are definitely less expressive of terroir than they are of, distiller technique and then all the other ingredients that are going into it. If you're making a cocktail, usually it's, at least half mixer, unless it's, a super boozy one. And so that means that like it's going to have a lot of flavor from the other ingredients. So it is definitely punchy. One of the other things I like about it is that cocktails you can tailor them to people's taste in a way that you can't, wine or beer. Oftentimes people, if they don't like beer, they're probably not going to find a single beer that they will like. Maybe there's one or two styles that really fit what they like. But when it comes to a cocktail, because you can express so many different flavors, it's actually not that hard to find something that somebody will like. Yeah, I think, at least.
No, I agree. And really the only thing you can say in the wine world is like a sommelier, right? Yeah. That's the job of the sommelier. But in the cocktail world, pretty much anybody who knows about cocktails in general can step into that role and tailor something to somebody with a base level of knowledge, as opposed to a knowledge of vintages and that sort of stuff. So how did that fascination lead you to create the product line that we see today? Because we started with the tonic syrup, and you said something crazy like 37 or 47
recipe iterations,
which is I can sympathize with. That's still more than I think I've ever done. But what did the creation of the brand and the line of syrups look like?
So it was basically an extension of my personal philosophy on food and beverage, which is just that if you make something the way it was originally made, usually it ends up better. Food and other things like that get bastardized over time, especially when you're adding in, strange flavor components and preservatives and things like that. So I'm an experimenter and a perfectionist at heart, which is why, 47 different recipe iterations. So when I started this business, I actually thought I was just going to create a line of 6 or 7 different tonic syrups, all different flavors. And I started selling the tonic, and within a month or two, I had about 15 customers who asked me for a grenadine. And I said, okay, let me figure out how grenadine was originally made and make this properly. And I'll admit, I didn't know a whole lot about it when I started. And so I looked into the history, and I do what I do best, which is, experimenting and then also looking deeply into the history of a thing and then trying to come up with a version that represents that flavor the best. And so then the grenadine was born, made from pomegranate juice, the way it was supposed to be made. But we don't just use pomegranate juice. We also use orange blossom water, which is a critical ingredient in grenadine. And then we also wanted to really respect the pomegranate. And we actually use 2 different types of pomegranate juice in it because different pomegranates have different flavor profiles to them. So pomegranates from California are really juicy and big and sweet, but not terribly complex. Then there's Turkish pomegranate juice, which is super complex, very tart, kind of brown and weird, but really delicious. Mm-hmm. So we mix the 2. So we get the full spectrum of pomegranate flavor. And that kind of attention to flavor detail is something that I wanted to apply across all of our products. Mm-hmm. So then after that, we released the cola, which is based on the original cola recipe, which took a lot of research. And of course, we can't use cocaine, but we make it as authentic as possible. And then after that, we did the ginger and the rich simple syrup. And our ginger is definitely our most popular syrup. It's made from just whole ginger that we peel and juice ourselves. So super, super gingery. We put a full pound of ginger in every single bottle. So you can see like a theme throughout all of this, which is just that we really care about quality and making everything the way it was originally made. We don't skimp in the way that a lot of companies do in order to make money. So there are lots of things that we didn't make money on our ginger for the first 6 months.
I was going to say, I just did the math in my head. What is it? What is ginger? You can 30 pounds, what I would buy is 30 pounds. And even then it's $5 a pound.
Yeah.
So if you're putting a pound in every bottle, that's $5 of input right there.
And not to mention that you're peeling the outside first and you're juicing it. So you're not even getting you'll end up having to use 2 to 3 pounds of ginger in order to, So we figured out how to make it work. But at the end of the day, I really care much more about, I think quality and authenticity are going to be the things that make this business work. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to compromise on it and those values. So it means that if we lose money on a product until we figure out a way to process it properly so that we can save money, fine, let's do that. But I wanted a real ginger beer base, one that actually tasted like ginger and wasn't loaded with sugar. So that's what happened.
Yeah, for sure. Now let's talk real quick about some of this sourcing that you do, because that obviously has to require a lot of work, especially at first, until you get a pipeline going and a relationship with your suppliers. And this might be a little bit foreign to some of our listeners who are sitting here listening to this and be like, all right, let's get to the syrups. But I think that a lot of the value is in overcoming some of those initial hurdles, especially when you're doing what you're doing, which is trying to create authentic, kind of historically relevant recipes. So I'm interested in the cola and the especially the Turkish pomegranates.
Yes.
How do you get these?
So it's kind of difficult because a lot of it just takes some serious Google research, and then you buy a lot, and then you taste all of it, and you just see what works best. So for the pomegranate juices, we buy juice. We don't juice it ourselves because it would be nearly impossible to juice it ourselves. The other thing is there would be no consistency from batch to batch, and we need consistency, especially acidity wise. So we found a supplier a long time ago for our Turkish pomegranate juice, and we bought a pallet of it once we decided on it. And we ran out of grenadine at one point, and we went to the pallet storage facility, and we only had a couple bottles left of the pallet. And so they just said, my guy said, okay, well, we need to order more pomegranate juice. Went back to the company. they went out of business and
Oh,
hadn't
no.
told us. So I was like, oh shoot, what are we supposed to do now? And so I called like 6 export companies from Turkey, and I was like, who exports pomegranate juice? Like, I need this. I also tried to contact the old company to figure out where were they getting their juice from so that I could like figure it out. They just went radio silent. So this kind of stuff is like absolutely crazy, but I think you have to do a lot of research to make sure that not only is it a good source, but it's a reliable source, because otherwise your customers could be out of, something for a while, which I'm sure you've probably run into before.
Sure. Yeah, there's the great lavender shortage of 2018. There was the great bitter orange peel shortage of 2017. There was, yeah, exactly.
There was a time I remember when like lemons a couple of years ago got super, super expensive.
Yeah, and limes. The cartels, something to do with like Mexican cartels.
Yeah, and like there was also like blight in Florida, and
Yeah.
so like the domestic source was really, really bad. And I was like, who ever thought that the problems I would be solving in my job are like where to get some lemons?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
Wow. So what about the cola? Is that made with actual cola nut?
Yes. So it's made from actual cola nut, which is a nut from a tree. It's actually technically a seed, so it doesn't cause issues with nut allergies or anything like that. And it's one of the original sources of caffeine. So it was originally used for, like, it's very rare, and so it was given as gifts in Africa, in different places, because they were just so rare, and obviously caffeine has an amazing effect that is used the world over. And so we use cola nut, and then we also use a bunch of other of the original ingredients. One of the most interesting ingredients that goes into cola, a real cola that most people don't know about, is ginger. It has a lot of ginger in it. So we actually take some of the fresh pressed juice that we make from our ginger and we put it into our cola, because originally cola was supposed to help settle the stomach, and it was sold actually at pharmacies across the US. So some people over a certain age might remember actually going to a pharmacy and having a prescription or asking for cola syrup to help settle the stomach. And most of that settling the stomach comes from the ginger in it, not from the cola nut.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. It's just so fascinating to hear the story about how all of that developed. So how about we just crack open the grenadine here, take a little taste of this as sort of like a representative of the line here, and then we can talk about some of the other decisions that you made in the process of developing these.
Sounds great. Yeah, so
It
this
smells really like earthy.
Yes. So that's the Turkish pomegranate right there. So that's why, and you look at the color, and it's like definitely grenadine, but it's got some cloudiness to it. It's even got a little bit of browner color to it, which is because of the Turkish pomegranate, which adds a ton to flavor. And you can even smell some of the tannin, too, that you'll end up tasting in the palate.
100%. It reminds me of chinar, like just on the nose.
It's really complex. And then one of the other things you get when you taste it,
Ooh.
yeah, there's a lot going on in there. There's sweetness, there's tartness, there's definitely pomegranate. Like, the pomegranate comes through. Yep.
You get that like jawbone response.
Totally. A little bit of tartness from the real pomegranate. And then there's, at the end, the nice orange blossom water for like the floral value.
Yeah, totally. And that's something that you have to have like a real careful hand on, because if you put too much in there, that can like completely ruin it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember actually when we were first starting, I had to toy around with the different levels of orange blossom water. And I overdid it once, and I was like, oh my God, this is medicinal.
Yeah. It's strange too, because it's like, technically it's just like a hydrosol or like a distilled, like not a alcohol distilled, but like a vapor water distilled thing.
Right.
And so you wouldn't think that it would be as potent as it is just being a distilled water, but it's like, whoa.
It's so potent.
For our listeners, you can go out and buy actual like off-the-shelf rose water or orange blossom water. Usually you're going to go to a Middle Eastern market for these types of products, and you can start playing around with them. Orgeat in the tiki tradition is one of the big kind of syrup players in that space. Obviously a traditional grenadine as well.
Yep.
But yeah, you'll, as soon as if you do decide to pick one up, just be real careful with it, because it can, your house, if you spill it, your house is going to smell like it for days, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not.
Totally.
I don't know.
It does smell really nice.
It
just
does.
can be a bit much. Definitely, if you do buy some, make sure to make a Ramos Gin Fizz. Your arms will hurt, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, and I find that it does do well in creamier and sweeter and dessertier things.
Absolutely.
Because isn't baklava orange water as well?
It's rose, I
Rose.
think. I can't remember, but a lot of Middle Eastern desserts have it in it. A lot of Indian desserts also have both rose water or orange blossom water in it. And often those are like the cheese / cottage cheese based Indian desserts that have those in them.
Exactly.
Tends to go well with like cardamom and things like that.
Right. And I think the rose water in the baklava is to pair with the pistachio.
That makes sense.
Right. So we're going to have all of these beautiful true syrups minus the rich simple right now. But we're going to have the grenadine, we're going to have the ginger, we're going to have the cola, and we're going to have the tonic syrup, all available for our listeners to purchase over at modernbarcart.com. And we're going to have, next to all of those product listings, we're going to have a nice flavor profile. We're going to have all the specs for these products, and we're going to have some recipe recommendations as well. So head on over to modernbarcart.com. If this podcast is live, if you're listening to it, then the products are up there ready to purchase. And we're even going to have a little feature video at some point in the next week showing Tory actually teaching us how to make a tequila sunrise using the grenadine here.
Perfect.
So last thing I wanted to talk about really is the process of transitioning from true syrups to Pratt Standard Cocktail Company. And I sympathize because obviously I've rebranded from just a bitters company in our embitterment bitters to Modern Bar Cart, different, kind of a different look and feel. I want to learn more about what kind of prompted you to make the rebrand.
Sure.
And A, how it's going, and B, like how the products kind of work into that.
Absolutely. So we were originally True Tonics Co. And then we turned into True Syrups and Garnishes because we weren't just doing tonic anymore. Like I thought we were just going to do tonic. And then I said, okay, well, we're just going to be a syrup company. And now I realized that, we're not just a syrup company. We do a lot more than that. We just sell syrups for now, but what we're really doing is providing, cocktail services and advice. We do a lot of cocktail classes, and we really wanted a name that really fit that better. So as True Syrups and Garnishes, it also felt like a really, to be honest, it's just a bland name. It means authenticity, it means something true, but it wasn't something that I could really build a brand around, not in the same way that I could build it around my name. And the truth is I got into this because of my family anyways. And so, because I had that quality standard growing up, I actually was sitting down with my sister, who's our designer, and she did all of our labels and everything. And we bounced around probably 100 names. And at the end of the day, we picked Pratt because it made sense. It said everything that we needed to say. And then we also tested it with a bunch of people, and a bunch of people said that even not knowing that my name was Pratt, that they felt Pratt Standard kind of conveyed exactly what we wanted it to convey. Because we're also expanding more nationally this year, I wanted a name that would be more distinctive than just True. There are a lot of companies out there named True. There are very few named Pratt.
And it's kind of abstract, right? And cocktails are the opposite of abstract. They're very concrete. They're tied to the person who makes them.
Absolutely. And there is something about, the comfort of having a cocktail from a person that that is part of what we're selling. So it's a really important thing for us to bring in that character and personality to the brand, as opposed to just being, true and authentic. That's great, but it's like having your own personal bartender.
Yeah, exactly. Were there any standout like really bad names that came out?
Well, there was one that was really divisive. So my sister and I really loved it, and my husband hated it. It was Tatler, which is like it's a British like newspaper or something like that. That's the only like name that actually already still exists out there, but it was a weird word. And so we thought, okay, well, maybe this would be good. And it's kind of related to telling stories around like beverages and stuff like that. But we didn't feel connected enough to it. So in thinking back on it, like I would use Tatler for maybe like a side brand if we were to do like some weird one-off syrups or something like that. But I don't think we'd do that.
If you were to do like an Earl Grey syrup and maybe like a Pim's syrup or something like that.
Totally. That would work.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Next.
Actually, yeah.
Next,
it's actually
next
really funny because we are toying around with some seasonal syrups right now because we're working with Whole Foods on their bar program for a couple of new places, which is really exciting. And one of the syrups is actually an Earl Grey vanilla syrup. We did a taste test with a bunch of friends last night, and everybody loved the Earl Grey vanilla. So we may be selling an Earl Grey vanilla.
That's
see.
Exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
Anything you want to share with our listeners before we jump into the lightning round?
No, I mean, I don't think I have anything in particular. Like, check out our website, follow us on social. We're not like super on top of it, but we try.
Yeah, we're in the kitchen most of the time making the stuff.
Exactly.
If you wonder where we are, in a commercial kitchen,
or in a car making deliveries.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so favorite cocktail of all time, and if you don't have one,
it's okay. I have one.
Okay, cool.
It's really easy for me. It's a daiquiri.
All right, what's your daiquiri spec?
So I like 1.5 of white rum. It can be a like lightly aged white rum, and then half of our rich simple syrup, or 1 of just a regular simple syrup, and 1 of lime. So equal parts lime to simple, and then 1.5 rum, and I can just down those like nobody's business.
Yeah. It's
my favorite cocktail.
It's the OG.
I know, and I love all variations on it. And if anybody out there has not had, you probably had, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably had a real one. But for anybody who hasn't had a real daiquiri, it's not supposed to be like frozen or like overly sweet. It's a shaken cocktail, strained, and it's just beautifully, it's so simple. It's just so simple and beautiful. You taste the rum, you taste the lime, you taste the sweet. There is nothing fussy about it.
Now, this might be a little bit meta since we're talking about cocktail ingredients. Mm-hmm. If you were a cocktail ingredient, what would you be?
So I actually thought about this one beforehand because I was like, how do I want to portray myself? And I think I'm going to say that I'm not a cocktail ingredient. I am the recipe. Because I am an incredibly detail-oriented and sometimes really anal person. And I feel like a recipe really reflects that a lot better than any specific ingredient.
Especially when you have to do 47 iterations.
Exactly. Well, for my personal needs, I needed to do 47. I'm sure it was probably good after 20, but...
But I think about when I do iterations like that, like I've got the spreadsheet and I've got the inputs and I'm, you know, like I have like a special way of tracking exactly what I'm tweaking between
absolutely
2A and 2B.
Eric, you're my kind of person.
Well, I think that's why we're both still alive after like 4 or 5 years of doing this.
I think so too.
It definitely takes a lot. So I like that because and recipes are something I've been getting more into. There's this, I just came across a podcast. It's only got like 6 episodes. It's some artist guy who reads food recipes. Like he'll pick very like well-written food recipes that like are really artfully written. And at first I was like, this is just some stupid performance piece. I can't believe I downloaded this. But I wasn't in the position to turn it off because I was like driving and there was a lot of traffic. And then by the time I got 5 minutes into it, I was like, it's actually fascinating to listen to somebody actually read a recipe because there actually is an art to it. So
that's something I never would have thought. And I can imagine like reading like a Julia Child recipe is totally different than, reading almost any other recipe. I mean, I love Julia Child's recipes, but goddamn, she's difficult.
Yeah, exactly. So if you could have a cocktail with anybody in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you drink? Just paint us a picture.
So my husband and I built a bar between our house and our neighbor's house.
Is it like on the fence?
It's like we have 2 townhouses and we both have porches out back, and there was a wall, but instead we decided the wall needed to be replaced. So we ripped it down and we built a bar. I'll send you a picture. You can put it up.
That's so cool.
And so we're out there almost every single day, just like having a cocktail or a glass of wine at the bar. And to be honest, like I wouldn't replace that for almost anything. It's just great, like having like neighbors and a community. And so I would say I'd probably just have a daiquiri sitting out with my husband and my neighbors.
Yeah. You can't beat it. So wait, so is there like because it's right between 2 houses. So is your side the back of the bar and their side the front? Or is there like 2 backs or 2 fronts?
So it's basically like we built a massive table. So we had, our side is a screen porch. And so one side was a wall up to a table that extends over onto their side. And then it like wraps around and comes down. So it's like a probably 8-foot long by 4-foot wide bar that makes up the boundary between our 2 houses.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really sweet.
That is very, very cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
You're welcome to come over for a drink sometime.
It's funny because I've been like in the back alley. You can't necessarily tell.
You can't really see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, we call it Eckington's hottest speakeasy.
It's funny. I've started having my friends come by here more and more often now that I've moved to somewhere that is not just a terrible, bad apartment. And they're like, the rule that we have is you text me ahead of time. You ask me what bottle you want to bring. Then they stop at the liquor store on the way here.
Nice.
And so I look, I'm like, I'm running low on Suze. Get me a bottle of Suze. And they come with that. And then I make them cocktails and then they leave without having to pay. So it's kind of like
it's a good deal.
It's legit,
Yeah. Well, also when you do the economics on like, okay, once you know how to make a good cocktail in your own home, I like going out for like a crazy experience every once in a while. But if you can make a really good cocktail at home, it's usually like the max it's going to cost you is $4 to make that cocktail, even if it's with the most premium ingredients. So for me, it's always like, why would I go out? I have this bar back here. I can make everything exactly the way I want to make it to my perfect specifications with the ingredients that I love for $4.
Yep, exactly. And if somebody brings a bottle and subsidizes
then
it, it's even
free.
cheaper.
Exactly.
So yeah. Yes, this is a great plug for that. Well, I mean, I think both of what we do is encourage people to drink at home.
Absolutely.
And be better drinkers outside of the home, obviously. But yeah, I can't agree more. Advicey stuff. Mm-hmm. Are there any cocktail books or books about like syrups that were influential to you as you got into this that you might recommend to others? Sure.
So I would say that my cooking background is probably the thing that's most influential. There's a bunch of different of my favorite cooking books that make sense here, but I would say my favorite is right now at least, and for the last probably couple of years, is a book called The Flavor Bible. Because it's a weird cocktail. I mean, it's a weird recipe book. It's basically doesn't have any recipes. You go in and it's an encyclopedia of ingredients, and you can say, okay, well, I have butternut squash. Let me look up butternut squash, and then it shows you a whole bunch of other flavors that work with butternut. So it might come up with, brown butter and sage and maple or something like that. And then you can come up with flavor combinations for whatever you're cooking. Or to be honest, I think it's great for figuring stuff out for cocktails for unique combinations, because the flavor profiles that apply to food are also things that apply to cocktails. It's just in liquid form.
Right. Yeah. The Flavor Bible's awesome. I have never had it, but I have another one called, I think it's called Culinary Artistry. And my wife and I jokingly call it Chefs Answering Questions because the authors got away with just interviewing chefs, and that's the bulk of the book.
That's awesome.
So
That's brilliant.
yes. Well, so we're going to have the Modern Bar Cart podcast, the book soon, but it's got a section that does very, very much that. And it also, the thing I like about it too, is that it also stipulates seasonality. So like if you're eating lamb in the spring, it's different than eating mutton in the winter. And here's how it's different based on the things that go best with it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a really cool place to like look for inspiration.
So do you have any advice for folks who are interested in, let's kind of tweak it a little bit. Instead of people who are interested in doing cocktails at home, what about people who are interested in making syrups at home? Because it's a very, very difficult thing. And obviously we're selling all of your products here.
Right.
But you can't do better than fresh. So what are like your big things to either make sure you do or avoid if somebody wants to try their hand at this at home after they taste your stuff and realize like, oh man, like what if I did this?
Absolutely. So one of the things there are a bunch of different pieces of advice I would give, but one of the biggest things is that you have to measure your ingredients. If you don't measure your ingredients, you will end up, because you're making it in such a small quantity, there is no room for error at the home. Like if you're going to make just a cup of syrup or a cup and a half, and you're going to try to infuse it with different botanicals and herbs and things like that, a difference in a gram makes a massive difference in the end of your syrup.
Yep.
So make sure that you pay attention to that. Also, think about different cooking processes and how you're going to express your botanicals. So we're also making a cranberry syrup potentially for Whole Foods. And the cranberry syrup, when you think about cranberry, you think about cooked cranberry as being very different from fresh cranberry in terms of the flavor. So just consider those things when you're making the syrup. If you cook down that syrup for a long time, it's going to taste more like cooked cranberry. If you just heat the sugar enough to dissolve in with the cranberry, it's going to taste like fresh cranberry. There are things like if you add any type of zest to your syrup, it will evaporate really, really quickly if your syrup is boiling. So make sure you take it off the heat and just lightly zest it in. Other botanicals take a lot of effort to infuse. So things like cinnamon or clove or other like very heavy fall spice notes, one of the best ways to infuse them and to actually get the most bang for your buck is to pressure cook a tea first. And then add stuff in. So just respect the ingredients and how they should be best expressed instead of just throwing some stuff in a pan and hoping it comes together. I mean, I'm sure you have experienced this a lot with bitters. Like there are a lot of people who follow a bitters recipe that doesn't make tinctures first. It doesn't make sense to do that because everything infuses at a different rate. And so you have to make a tincture first in order to mix it at the end to make it taste right for a bitters. Because, a cinchona bark that steeps for 3 days is different than one that steeps for 5 days. But your ideal cinnamon might be 5 days, but your cinchona ideal is 3 days. So it's better to do. So just pay attention to your recipe, make sure you're following, maybe weighing your ingredients. That's usually a better way to do stuff. And then pay attention to how the ingredients might be best expressed. And don't be afraid to just like toy around with stuff. Sugar is cheap. So just like if something doesn't taste right, toss it out, start again, learn from your mistakes, and you'll probably do just fine. Yeah,
I think that just in terms of purchases for getting started with syrups, I think a decent kitchen scale is important. Something that goes up to about 5 to 7 pounds that you can put a measuring cup on and then tear it out to zero.
Definitely.
One of the things that we talk about in our homemade syrups episode is measuring by weight versus by like the cup volume. The cool thing about water is that 1 milliliter equals 1 gram. So you can pretty much just measure out your water. But when it comes to sugar, the different amounts and different types of sugar are going to weigh different amounts at various levels. So it's important when you're trying to figure out like what we would call your bricks, basically how much sugar is in the water, the difference between a simple and a rich simple. That's best done by weight if you're trying to be consistent and replicate it across time. So a kitchen scale is great. And then in terms of straining, there's some pretty easy things that you can do. Obviously, most people are going to have like a sieve.
Sure.
And then in addition to that, I think that just cheesecloth and then maybe even like a nut milk bag are really
honestly,
useful.
What I think they're super useful, but what most people will already have in their own home is coffee filters.
Exactly.
Coffee filters are super easy. You can just line a sieve with it and then you're getting your straining at the same time. Also, a lot of sediment will settle out at the bottom. So if you are okay with it, you can just, pour it into a container and then pour off the top like 3/4 and then toss out the bottom at the end. And chances are you'll still have a great syrup and it won't have as much sediment in it.
My kind of like wish list item right now is a giant separatory funnel. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be so nice.
Just rack it right off the bottom.
It'd be so nice.
I'm trying to like convince my wife that we have room, and I don't. I don't think it's the case.
That's like when we were trying to figure out how to make the ginger a profitable thing. One of the biggest problems was we were spending like 40 man hours a week just peeling ginger because the flavor difference between peeled ginger when it's been juiced and just regular ginger is massive. When it hasn't been peeled, it has this funky, like really like root-like aftertaste. It's dirty. It's like dirt, yeah. And so it really messes. It's almost like wet socks that have been, it's really gross. So we had to figure out how to peel it properly. And it's like the weirdest thing of my life that we spent $4,000 on a ginger peeler. But like it paid for itself in a couple of months. And I was like, this is a weird part of my life that I buy a ginger peeler.
Do you have to get the ginger to a certain size before you stick it in?
So what we did was there are ginger peelers that come from China, but I didn't like trust any of that. So I decided that we were going to get a ginger peeler that's actually a potato peeler. Mm-hmm. So it's an industrial potato peeler that has an abraded basket on the inside, and it has a water jet that shoots water through the abraded inside and tosses the ginger. And what we do is we just break off all the big knobs, basically, toss it in. And what had taken us, 40 man hours a week to peel, I think it was like 700 pounds of ginger, is now it takes us about 5 minutes.
That's insane.
Yeah, and my guys were a little bit upset, and they were like, "Come on, like, couldn't have we gotten this earlier?" I'm like, "Yeah, but it was $4,000."
Yeah, that's not nothing. Wow.
Yeah.
So this has been great, Tori. Gonna give you a chance now to just tell folks all of the social handles and just where they can reach out to you if they have any questions. Obviously, of course, you know where you can reach us. But if you have a syrup question, maybe better to go to somebody who actually does it for a living as opposed to somebody like me who just talks about it.
I'm sure you know plenty, but if you guys want to reach out to me, my email is Tory@prattstandard.com.
Tory with a Y.
Tory with a Y. Tory@prattstandard.com. And then our social media handles are all at Pratt Standard. So Pratt Standard on Facebook and Pratt Standard on Instagram. We don't really do Twitter, so just follow us on Instagram and on Facebook.
Nobody good does Twitter. It's no, it's all in the Insta. So Tori, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's 2 big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook @modernbarcart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed, delicious syrups and brand building knowledge by Tory Pratt of Pratt Standard Cocktail Company, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2019.